Welcome to the JBS election series, Road to the White House 2016. I'm Micah Halpern. Thanks for joining me today as I sit in for Mark Golub. Today we will have a conversation with Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for JTA, Ron Kampeas. Before I begin, and before I bring him in, let me lay a foundation. Last night, Iowa caucused. That's how they say it in Iowa. They caucused. And it was exciting. It may actually be more exciting than this Sunday's Super Bowl. The caucuses are weird. Nothing like you could possibly imagine. It is literally town meeting after town meeting with people walking and talking, raising their hands, voting, but not in the ballot box. They literally raise their hands. If you've never been there, it's impossible to even imagine what a caucus is. Although the new media and the cable coverage offer the sliver of understanding. We're getting closer. But the caucuses are not primaries. The Democrats had a nail-biter. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders surprisingly tied the presumed shoo-in candidate Hillary Clinton. But that paled in comparison to the Republican race, where Cruz and Rubio outperformed all the polls, all the expectations of the polls, where Cruz came in a solid first place with Trump and Rubio, respectively, coming in neck and neck, second and third place. This is an important point. These results say something about the polls. They are often incorrect. Actually, a pollster once told me, polls do not lie. People lie to the pollsters. We want to discuss this in the next few days, especially the primary in New Hampshire, with Ron Kampeas, the JTA DC Bureau Chief. We want to find out from him, what does all this mean, and how does it impact on us as Americans, as a Jewish community, and as lovers of Israel? Welcome, Ron.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's begin by asking, what time did you fall asleep last night? Because I expected it was going to be an early night, and it was not for me.
I think about 1 a.m. I finally went to bed.
How were you surprised by the results of last night's caucuses?
I try to keep an open mind. I try not to be surprised or not surprised, but certainly as soon as I turned on the cable networks and they were saying that there were big lines outside the caucuses and they were saying that's a good sign for Donald Trump, I didn't expect it to go more Donald Trump's way, and it didn't. The Bernie Sanders Hillary Clinton tie had been more or less anticipated, but everybody was saying that Ted Cruz had the best ground game, and that's what's important in Iowa, in every state, but in Iowa especially, for the reasons that you outlined, because it's such an involved voting process. But it was interesting how Cruz defied those last-minute expectations.
What's interesting also, it's everyone said, all the pundits, and I'm a pundit too, so I'm somewhat guilty of this. The pundits said, the more that come, the more positive it will be for Trump. And there's no question that the Trumpization of this election has brought more people's interest. But does that actually mean they're going to support him? And that's really the question that emerged in Iowa.
Right. I think it's interesting because, on the one hand, everybody's saying that Trump's second place in Iowa, and is not just second place, but tying with Rubio, whom he had previously derided, is going to hurt him because he's made himself into the winner. He has to be the winner. It's all or nothing for him. And so, will that replicate itself in New Hampshire? On the other hand, New Hampshire, you just go and you cast a ballot. As you've pointed out, in Iowa, it requires a greater emotional time, intellectual investment in the process. You have to go to a room, you have to listen to speeches. In the Republican caucus, you throw your ballots in a hat, you wait for them to be counted, you wait for them to be counted again. And it's a lot of time on a very cold winter's evening. And that's not a kind of process that's likely to involve people who are not totally committed to the effort. And so that would have hurt Trump. We'll see what happens in New Hampshire, where, it's just a matter of making sure you get out of the house on voting day, go and cast your ballot and go home.
Well, actually, it's a big question in general. In New Hampshire, they have a state law which says they have to be the first primary. And when South Carolina changed their primary 8 years ago, New Hampshire then changed theirs to advance theirs because they wanted to be first. Iowa's an interesting issue also. Are these states actually that important, or are we making them important, or they are making themselves important? Does it really matter what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire the way it did 100 years ago?
It doesn't matter as much. I mean, the thing is that people have been pointing out that the last two Republican winners in Iowa, Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, eventually went nowhere. Mm-hmm. But On the other hand, they're predictors of how difficult it's going to be for the candidate in the general election. And that's in that sense, last night wasn't such great news for Hillary Clinton because she's going to have to face a battle with Bernie Sanders. In previous elections, Mitt Romney turned out not to be the anointed son in 2012 when Rick Santorum managed to upend him, and the same goes for John McCain in 2008 with Mike Huckabee winning. So there are predictors of how difficult a campaign will be, and they're important because we make them important because they're first. I mean, we've been focusing, as you pointed out, polls are not necessarily accurate. They are not actual voting. And we focus so much on polls. This is going to happen. Trump is ahead. Trump is the front runner.
Correct.
And then finally this is our first reality check. So in that sense, it is important.
Well, it's interesting also is that the organizations tended to be downplayed by a lot of the commentators. But last night we saw that because of Cruz's great performance or great organization, he came out very strong. And Rubio also had a good organization there, at least in Iowa. Now, what's interesting is Sanders really doesn't have much organization. Just to give you an aside, I'm walking into the subway on the Upper West Side of Manhattan the other day, and they're trying to get people to sign the petition to get Sanders on the ballot in New York.
Oh, wow.
He's not even on the ballot in New York. Now, how can you run? I mean, talk about shocked. I went to go research it. I couldn't believe it. So it's hard to assume him to be able to unseat the presumed candidate when he's not even on the ballot in New York.
Yeah, I think that that's interesting. I mean, in terms of organization, the one time I went to Iowa in 2003, Kerry was near the bottom of the polls. Howard Dean was at the top of the polls. But then I went to the Jefferson-Jackson dinner, which is this important arena-filled dinner that the Democrats have. And I could see from that Kerry was much better organized than Dean. And I thought, okay, he's probably going to win. And I was right. It turned out that he did win Iowa, and he went on to win the nomination. And so it's interesting. So Ted Cruz's organization in Iowa and everywhere is very important. Like I said, you have to get out the vote. Whether, what it means that Bernie Sanders managed to tie Hillary Clinton in Iowa, I think there was a lot of last-minute, very focused organization going on in both campaigns. Mm-hmm. I think you saw it in terms of Bernie Sanders people telling students not to vote in their campuses, but to go to their hometowns because the way that the caucuses are weighted, their votes counted more in their hometowns than on campus. And so there was a degree of organization there, but also there's just a kind of fatigue. There's a Clinton fatigue that was reflected in 2008 when Obama managed to best her in Iowa and then went on to win. And I think it's reflected, I don't know if it's going to actually prevent her now from being the candidate, but it's reflecting it in how popular Bernie Sanders is. Also because he's the only opposition candidate. Martin O'Malley barely made a dent and is now pulled out of the race.
It's interesting, actually. The O'Malley situation was fascinating also, as both the Democratic candidates not only thanked them, but thanked them for contributing, not in the election process, but rather in the discussion, raising the issues. Because without that, without him asking certain questions, it would have been even more of a boring set of debates that emerged between the Democrats, which is sort of interesting. Because that's exactly the opposite of the kind of debate structure that we had in the Republicans.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to ask you something now, if we can switch just a little bit in terms of the Israel-Jewish question. Mm-hmm. It seems that Israel and the Jewish question has really somewhat been marginalized on these with these candidates. Certainly on the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, Trump made his remarks at the Republican-Jewish coalition. I don't know if you were there at that. I would guess you were. So you heard it from the horse's mouth. And we see Cruz saying it, peppering his discussions periodically, and he always refers to Benjamin Netanyahu. But more than that, we really don't have a real set of platforms coming out of the candidates. Are they indistinguishable? Are they all the same? Do we not have anything to worry about? And if that's the case, are we only going to be then voting for domestic issues?
No, I think that if you're focused on Israel, there's a great deal of diversity out in the field, especially if you look at the broad spectrum of both parties, for sure. I think that it's been de-emphasized to a degree because because there's been so much focus on the economy, on health care, on social issues. But even within the Republican Party, and even among the frontrunners in the Republican Party, there is a there's a great deal of difference on Israel and on the Middle East.
So let's run them down, if you could, for the viewer, okay? Because you have a sophisticated knowledge, and you have a card, a game card on it, so you know exactly what the team looks like. Run down, candidate by candidate, how you think they stand on the basic issue of Israel, on the basic issue of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and of course also in terms of whether or not when they're going to be pressuring Israel the way in which we have in the current administration, where pressure really emerged tremendously from this president and between Israel and the United States.
Okay, well, first of all, Donald Trump, like you pointed out at the Republican Jewish Coalition, he said things that that upset a lot of the people there. And I'm not talking about the jokes he made about everybody there being millionaires. He said that at that time he did not want to commit to recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, United Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And that kind of reflects who he is. He's a negotiator. I mean, he's explained why. He doesn't like to go into a negotiation saying what he wants his outcome to be. He likes to keep it open a little bit. But that's not the kind of thing that you take into a Republican Jewish Coalition meeting. Jerusalem being United Capital of Israel is sacrosanct for small C conservative Jews, for Republican Jews. And then he said something that, if you talk to people who were there, was even more worrisome. He talked about, well, and in terms of what you said about pressure, this could go either way, because he said, I'm going to make a go at making peace, but neither side is committed to peace. Yeah, the Palestinians and the Israelis have both shown they're not committed to peace. Again,
actually, he said they're not trying hard enough.
Right. And
he said the Israelis aren't trying hard enough. Because if they tried harder, they would have gotten it.
And for Republican Jews, I mean, and for any pro-Israel Jew who remembers the last 15 years, and Ehud Barak's offers at Camp David and Ehud Olmert's offers at Annapolis, they've done nothing but to try hard from that perspective. And for him to come and say that shows that he doesn't come in with an inherently sympathetic pro-Israel view, for sure. On the other hand, he's saying that in the context of saying, maybe I won't even have a go at this at all. And from a certain pro-Israel perspective, especially on the more right-wing side, that's okay. Let Israel deal with this. That might be okay. Trump, like Cruz and like Rubio, has said he will tear up the Iran deal on day one. Cruz and Rubio, by the way, are committed to moving the capital, the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Trump has now said that he's in favor of that as well, so he's a little bit all over the place on that. So they've all three of them have said they'll tear up the Iran deal on day one. If you talk to foreign policy experts, there's a lot of questions about really how, can you do that once it's so advanced? And you get the other establishment candidates, people like Jeb Bush and Kasich from Ohio, and saying, that's probably not likely. Actually, let me correct that. Trump didn't say, Trump has not committed to tearing up the Iran deal. He said he would do what he could. He would consult with the experts and do what he could to reverse the Iran deal. So he's actually being a little more realistic than Cruz and Rubio.
I'm going to interrupt you there. It's very hard to determine what Trump says sometimes, because he says so many different things about so many different. And on this, he's flip-flopped so many times. But that's one of the reasons why he's so attractive to many voters, by the way, which is very interesting. So he has said both of those things. He's going to rip it up. It's the first thing. It's the worst deal possible. I've never seen a deal like that. And then he also goes back and says, I want to talk to people who know more about it, which is interesting also. But that's classic Trump.
Right, exactly. And then, the difference between Rubio and Cruz among what we now see are the front runners is that Rubio has a very good, strong relationship with the traditional pro-Israel community here in Washington, and the traditional, more conservative pro-Israel community. One of the first things he did when he was elected senator was he spoke at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a think tank which attracts a lot of people who are in that traditional pro-Israel community, and people are blown away by his knowledge, the depth of his knowledge about the region. And he does believe, like neoconservatives believe, in a strongly interventionist foreign policy. Cruz does not. Cruz has taken to slagging off on neoconservatives. That is not making a lot of conservative Jews happy, and that's the micro of his big.
No, I just want to say when Ron says conservative Jews, he means small c, not capital C.
Right. Politically conservative Jews, I should say. And it's also it's like it's a micro version of his macro message, which is he's against the establishment. So he's certainly against the sorry, the Washington establishment, the neoconservative think tank establishment, and partly because of their outlook, which does stemming from what happened in World War II. I mean, because after all, that's what the interventionist foreign policy comes from. But also because the Jewish community, the pro-Israel community, works with the establishment. It works with what's there. It doesn't go out looking for it has never gone out, like let's say the Tea Party, to look for anti-establishment candidates to upend the establishment. It actually it says, okay, you've been elected. You're the people who are here. You're the people who are in power. We're going to work with you. And so naturally, it becomes part of that establishment by dint of doing that. And here comes Ted Cruz and says, "I want to smash all that up." So he's gonna upset some Jewish funders and voters and opinion makers.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's going to be there is a significant distinction between them when you look at it carefully. What's interesting also is that these main candidates, although have a real affinity to Israel, but they're not going to necessarily fall into line with Israel's point of view on every issue. And that's important also. And as Americans, we have to realize that America has its agenda also. So this current president, let's say, for instance, considers himself a lover of Israel. And his point of view, though, is that in order to love Israel, you also have to push her to do things that he thinks are important for Israel and the region, as well as for American best interests. And we've got to realize that as voters and as American Jews, that it's important for us to see that, look through the prism of these particular candidates, because they're going to approach the issue the similar way, not necessarily from the point of view of an Obama administration, but they're going to have an administration which is going to be very similar. They have their objectives that they want to fulfill. I think it's important that you laid that out. How do you think the Jewish vote will fall out in this election? Do you think it'll be, again, the 70, the 75, almost 80% Democrat, and almost all Orthodox Jews will vote Republican, and for people who are interested in social issues, they'll be voting Democrat, and for those people for whom Israel is important, they'll be voting Republican? Is that how you think it's going to lay out?
It depends on the candidates. I mean, I think, Bernie Sanders is, he's basically the definition that you just gave to Obama. I mean, I think he sees himself as caring about Israel. He lived in Israel with his first wife for a period. Sure. But he also thinks, he said it out loud, that the American government should use the leverage of assistance to pressure countries that it gives its assistance to. And he's always named Israel as one of those countries. He's always been careful whenever he does that to say, and that goes for Arab countries that we give assistance to as well. He wants, it shows how it's important to him to appear even-handed. But
no, I think it's important. I want to stop you there for a second. I think it's really important to lay that out. See, because from a lot of points of view here in the United States and within the Jewish community, there's the perception is that you either love Israel or don't. But there is very much a critique of Israel which can come out of love. And we're seeing that actually right now in the discussion with Ban Ki-moon and the statements, his op-ed in yesterday's New York Times, that one can give critique out of love and not necessarily be a hater of Israel. And it's important for us as educated voters in America to recognize that nuance, that you don't always have to toe step with exactly what the current Israeli government says and does in order to be a lover of Israel.
Right. And I think, that reflected itself with Sanders. There's a town hall that he had in Cabot, Vermont in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge. I don't know if a lot of people have seen that, but it's worth seeing because he really pushes back against the anti-Israel people in that room. And there are a lot of them. They seem to have stacked that town hall that day. And he keeps on saying, Israel, he says Israel can use excessive force. He has that point of view, but it has every right to defend itself. And he keeps on pointing out that Hamas wants to destroy Israel. And he's doing that in a hostile room. He doesn't skate over it. He doesn't concede any points. He's and that's partly Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders.
Right. He's a very interesting guy. Sanders is a remarkable character. He does not wave from the truth. He sticks straight to his guns on issues of principle, justice, right versus wrong. And he makes it very clear. You might disagree with him. You might think he's wrong, but he does not pander to varying ideas that violate his moral compass.
Right. Yeah, more or less that's right. And that's what you're going to see on Israel. I think Clinton is going to, to the degree that she's very subtly criticized the Obama administration, sometimes not so subtly. She said that it pushed pushed Israel too hard on settlements too early. In other words, as early as 2009, and that's not something she would have done. I think she would have. She's trying to get across the message that, like, on the Iran deal, she backs the Iran deal. She would have put through the Iran deal. So I think that if she had been president for the last 4 years, that tension would have nonetheless played out. But she would have. She likes to say that she would have kept Israel more in her orbit. Perhaps that means that once the secret negotiations got underway, as president, she would have favored bringing in Netanyahu, as the Obama administration famously kept the backdoor negotiations secret. So and her advisors are all from within the pro-Israel camp, whether it's you consider them liberal pro-Israel, more, I don't know if any of you even remembers the Israel Policy Forum, that kind of pro-Israel, rather than AIPAC pro-Israel. But and when she was a New York senator, she was beloved at AIPAC. I mean, they would, one of their most important speeches is the last speech on Tuesday morning before everybody goes to the Hill, because that's the speaker that riles everybody up and gets them motivated. And that was more often than not, when she was senator, that was Clinton, because she knew exactly what to say.
You're laying out actually an important distinction here, and the Clinton distinction is clear. And I want to raise it for you and then for the viewers, obviously. Clinton is an experienced politician, even though she really hasn't been in office for all that long when you think about it, but she really is an experienced politician. And they can be defined as opportunists. That is, that they use the opportunities available to them to further their particular cause and their issues. Whereas Sanders is an ideologue. On the right, in the Republican Party, we also see differences between politicians and ideologues. Cruz is much more of an ideologue. Rubio is much more of a politician. And so we see this distinction over politics, which is very, very interesting in terms of leadership. They're dramatically different leadership roles. So we can count on Hillary, I think, to do the right thing because it's in their best interest as leaders to do the right thing, which I think is very, very interesting and very different. The question will be how much pressure will be brought by her or by other candidates on the Jewish community in America, as well as on Israel, to accommodate those particular goals.
Well, that's the that's the interesting thing. It really that depends. I mean, personality and ideology play a big role in that.
Yes.
The biggest role that we often forget is circumstance. I mean, the Obama administration actually has one of its defenses in terms of its tensions with Israel over the Iran deal, not over the whole Israel-Palestinian peace talks so much, but over the Iran deal, is that it had no choice but to do something on the Iran deal. It was inheriting an Iran that was rapidly getting close to nuclear weapons capability in 2009, because the Bush administration's strategy of not dealing with Iran at all hadn't worked. So it had to come up with some kind of alternative. Whether that alternative was the best alternative or not, of course, is left up to question. But those circumstances set its, with Netanyahu's election, also within a couple of months of Obama's inauguration, set both governments on a crash course towards each other, because Netanyahu was never going to favor any kind of deal.
Correct.
And Obama didn't see a way out of another way to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state.
What do you anticipate and expect over the next few weeks in terms of the Jewish community, as well as in terms of their interaction with these candidates? And do you see any really interesting, or is it more of the same kind of issues that will emerge over the next few weeks?
No, I don't think. I think the issues will remain the same in terms of the personalities. I mean, that's going to be interesting. First of all, Jeb Bush a year ago was the favored son. He was the guy who was going to win this. He's got to get out sooner or later. I mean, he's polling 6% in New Hampshire. He polled 3% last night. And Jeb Bush attracted the major Jewish donors.
He's got, by the way, just as a side, he still has, rumor has it, 59 million in his war chest. And he can't give that back. He has to use it, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, and so, do his Jewish donors finally sit him down and say, it's time you got out, maybe we should back Rubio, who, even though now their personalities are clashing, they used to be very close, and their outlook on the Middle East is relatively close. That's one thing. So where did Jeb Bush's Jewish backers go? Who do the Adelsons favor? Sheldon and Miriam Adelson. Mm-hmm. They've hinted that they're trying to decide between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. they gave their personal maxim direct campaigning to Ted Cruz. Is that a hint that they're going to go with Ted Cruz? That's a relatively small amount. It's $2,700, but so it's not determinative. But that's that's interesting, especially now that Rubio performed so strongly.
It's true. It's true. I want to thank Ron Kampeas, the bureau chief for JTA in Washington, D.C., for joining us and shedding his insights, showing us what's happening on this very exciting day. Look, the reality is we're at the very beginning of a primary cycle, and there is a lot of excitement on the road ahead. There's no doubt about it. With all the primaries ahead of us, as well as all the issues that are emerging. It's not just simple questions about health care. It's a lot of issues about the Jewish community, a lot of issues about Israel. So I want to thank you very much for watching this edition of Road to the White House 2016. I'm Micah Halpern, sitting in for Mark Golub.